Just give this a light wipe with molybdenum paste, and you can see I've left virtually nothing on there. It's just like a faint dirty mark. Get this in the correct position. Here's our moving plate. Here it is. Drop that into position. And that's retained by 2 shoulder screws. I'm supporting that settings ring underneath with my fingers so it doesn't get away. See if I can get that screw started. And its mate over here. These threads are quite fine, easily stripped out, and not uncommonly found to be stripped out. When they are stripped, the answer is to rivet them over, and people do. You support the head of the screw on the other side on something. Give this a few taps to rivet the screw over so that it can't come loose. If you get one that's particularly tight to unscrew, chances are it's been riveted over. That all looks good. What's that mark on the case there? Just checking that. Doesn't want to go away. I think there's just a touch of corrosion on there. And that will be almost certainly because moisture got into the back of the shutter at some stage. Yep, no, that's alright, it's not causing any harm. Okay, so there's our settings lever in place. We're interested in this position because that's the fully open position, because that's where the case will be put back over the retainer plate, and the retainer plate is going to have all the diaphragm blades on it in a second. The assembly jig. Diaphragm, this plate goes on there plain side upwards, the side with the 5 dimples goes downwards, and all I have to do is pick up 10 diaphragm blades and lay them carefully in place. The blades, the pivot points closer to the centre line of the blades are facing downwards here. Why is that ring sitting up so high in there? Hang on, something's not right with my jig. That's better. Make sure I've got things seated correctly. And my assembly jig is just 2 half-inch drive sockets with a square wooden peg holding them together. And many times I've considered making a special tool to do this job, and then I quickly remember that actually this works really well, and anything I wasted my time making is probably not going to work any better, so I haven't bothered. Once you get round here, you've got to start pulling the blades back to expose the holes in the mechanism, the retainer plate. And if you're lucky, this goes right first time. But don't be surprised if you have to do this any number of times until you get it right, because it's so easy to accidentally bump things. that laying 10 blades correctly in position, one after another, doesn't always go smoothly. My 10 blades in position. Now I've got to lift these blades up and over the top and swing them gently into position without disturbing them from their pivot point in the plate, like that. Now on later shutters, this plate would be going on now. And you would fit the settings lever afterwards, but because you can't on this type, you've got to do it this way. So I'm just getting this all lined up, and I know which way the case goes on because it only goes on in one way. I'm looking for the screw holes. There are the screw holes there, making sure that's lined up with that. About there. No, about there. And I should be able to lower that into position if I'm very lucky. Got to get that over those pivot pins and the blades, get them all seated in there. Give it a wriggle. Turn the jig over. Carefully lift the outside off, put it in underneath to support it, rotate this plate to line up the screw holes, and I should have my 3 screws that will hold the retainer plate in place. Alright, let's start. That screw hasn't got enough lead on the end of it, doesn't want to drop into the hole. Let's get one of the others in place. Don't want to be fighting with these. That's one started. Let's try the other screw in that position. That looks more promising. Yep. Okay, well with 2 of the screws in there I can sort of breathe now because it means I'm unlikely to disturb things and have the blades go flying. Let's get this last screw in position in the last available spot. There's something odd about that screw. Now it's going in. Right, just check all the pivots are in place in the plate. Are they all in the moving plate? Yes. The blades move smoothly. We've got a full circle there, nothing odd going on. So I can tighten up those 3 screws holding the retainer plate in place. And that's the diaphragm done. You can see there's the staining marks on those blades that didn't go away. That's life, we're stuck with that. You can see by the pattern of them that the blades sat in this position, almost fully open, for some considerable length of time, enough for that pattern to set. Oh well, that's our case done. I'm pleased with that. Let's pop that to one side. the mechanism plate next and the shutter blades. Now these shutter blades are very oily looking. These are earlier shutter blades. They're two pieces of metal. They've got a piece here riveted on with those little brass rivets that you see there. It makes them slightly problematical to polish because polish will tend to run in between the two metal surfaces there and then want to come out later and laugh at you. I'll clean one of those with a bit of naphtha and I'll see what the result looks like. I've got to decide whether they need to be polished or not. And I'm hoping not. Excuse me while I wreck the place. There's certainly surface corrosion on the blade, I can see that there, and staining as well, but surface corrosion is certainly visible on there. And these are like scuff marks along there, where it's been scuffing on something. Possibly the tail of the next blade as it opens and closes over it. Oh, this surface, you can tell as soon as you start cleaning these whether they need done. The cotton bud here feels rough. You feel resistance as you run it over that surface. That's surface corrosion again, and it's left that rough. You can actually hear that squeaking as I try and run it over there. Whereas the blade without that problem, you don't get that. It's just smooth. This is rough. Okay, well I'll have to polish those blades with Brasso. Yes, a lot of surface corrosion on that one. And clean them thoroughly and then they'll be good to go. Oh yeah, that's another rough one, you could hear that. This is a clean one by comparison. There's nothing to hear. This one. Right, Brasso. Alright, I'm going to start polishing these shutter blades, much though I'd like not to have to. I'm going to start polishing these shutter blades. I've got some Brasso metal polish here and I've got a block of hard foam here that I can work on. So I've got to polish these surfaces down. Now typically they clean up very well indeed and all markings and stuff go away. Of course you never know until you do them whether it's going to be a complete success, but I'm reasonably confident that this will be okay. This was one of the quite rough blades and you can feel the change as you polish it. It goes from a rough start, you can feel the surface getting smoother and smoother, and the cotton bud just runs over the top of it. Have a quick look at this one, see what it's like. I'm just going to polish off that polish, see what the surface looks like, and it's good. Yeah, that looks like a new blade. Of course I've got to clean that blade entirely now in solvent to remove all traces of polish, which is time consuming to say the least, but there's no escaping that unfortunately. And I'll do these other blades And you can see I'm just using another cotton bud to hold this down while I work on it. You don't want to use the end of a tool or something to do that, because you'd end up scratching it or damaging it. This is another very marked blade. So the marks on there are either surface corrosion or it's a deposit of from the oil that's got on the blades in the past. You have to be quite cautious doing this. You don't want to bend the blade. So you can be careful not to catch the tip of the blade with your cotton bud and bending it up. Believe me, those sorts of things happen far too frequently. It wouldn't be the end of the world in this case, because I can probably find another blade amongst my parts to replace one if I make a mess of it. But sometimes if you're working on a camera for which you have no spare parts, and for which no spare parts are likely to be available without enormous expense, it would be a disaster if you made a mess of a blade. Right, here's the fifth blade. Alright, put that away, put my polish away. See if these blades will play nicely as I clean them up. That looks very good. That looks like a new blade. I've got to remove all traces of the polish from the blades, because any traces on there are either going to be the abrasive from the polish or whatever medium it is dissolved in, which is probably could well have waxes or something in it to help reduce future corrosion. The polish being made to do people's shiny copper kettles and other such things. I can see some marks on that one. They're scuff marks. They're probably a bit deeper. but generally speaking they are looking like 5 new shiny blades, fresh from the factory. And they probably haven't looked this pretty since about 1936. Alright, they look good. Very pleased with that result. I will pop them to one side. And soon I can assemble the shutter, hopefully. The mechanism plate though, the mechanism plate, we haven't dealt with that. This is quite dirty, everything's quite sticky. So the lever here that I'm just removing operates the blade actuating ring. The blade actuating ring being the ring that moves clockwise or anti-clockwise to open the blades. This is all sticky with dirt and grease. The retaining plate here has 3 screws, yep. They may or may not all be the same length. If there's going to be a long one, it'll be here. No, it's not long today. So they're all the same length in this shutter. Take the retaining plate off. There's our blade actuating ring, the piece that swings clockwise or anti-clockwise, and here's the mechanism plate. Now you can probably see the discoloration on there. There's some green discoloration right here, which is presumably grease, and fortunately it's pretty light. And it's dissolving quite readily. So what I've got to do here is swab the mechanism plate, get it nice and clean. At the moment I'm just doing the underside, the blade side of it. You can see a mark on the mechanism plate there, which almost certainly will correspond with the similar corrosion mark that I've noticed in the shutter case. And it's where moisture or something has been introduced and it's sat trapped between the two surfaces. Just clean round the centre here, this is where the blade actuating ring will run. And the top side of the mechanism plate. This is somewhat dirtier. I'll start with the lens tube. Clean that inside, that's where the lens screws in. And around the lens tube, around the outside of it, is where the main lever runs and the shutter speed settings cam plate runs. This is quite dirty. More of that grease there. And there's some nasty looking green stuff there, I'm not sure what that was. That looked like verdigris. It could have been something that's escaped from the Zeiss bump somewhere. this little lever here normally can stay on the mechanism plate. That is used to manually open the shutter blades on the B and T settings with a shutter like this. Now, working around this retard gear train, there's a coil spring here, a hairspring, and I'm just going to hold back the pallets with my finger, swing the arm right and allow the pallets to drop back, and that holds that coil spring wound up. And because it's wound up, it's not in the way here while I clean around that surface with a cotton bud. If you didn't do that, you're in danger of damaging the hairspring. So I'll run around this area here, try and get rid of all that dirt. That's good. Now the retard gear train, I'm just checking the action of that. It seems fairly prompt, it's not bad. That needs to be flushed out and worked thoroughly so that the naphtha will loosen up and flush away any dust or dirt or old grease or anything else that's in there which we don't want. And I'll blow that away. So that as you blow out the solvent, you're also blowing out the contaminants. If you simply leave the solvent to evaporate, you'll leave the contaminants behind. All they'll have done is moved from one spot to another. Well, that's looking nice and clean now. That should be fine. The blade actuating ring, let's have a look at that. It doesn't look too bad. Sometimes these are well greased and they're a mess to clean up. This appears to be quite clean. It must have had a minimum of lubricant in there. Where that green grease had come from is anyone's guess. There, you can see it there. It's certainly about and the problem with old grease is as it dries out it loses all its most volatile components and you end up left with the base, the fillers, which can be very waxy, very heavy, and can glue things together very, very well. That surface seems fine. Let's do this surface. This is the surface the shutter blades runs across. There's a little bit of colour coming off there. That'll do. I'll lubricate the blade actuating ring and the retard gear train with some graphite powder, and I can do that after this is assembled. So I'll get this plate in position. There's a little rivet in here that locates it so that it can only go in one place. And we're fortunate that the three screws are all the same length. To get the screws started, once they're all in place, you can go around and tighten them up. If you just tighten up, put one screw in and tighten it up, you can rest assured that you won't be able to get something in the next screw in, because it'll be slightly out of line or something. Just seeing a thread of cotton there from the one of the cotton buds. It can be very hard to see until later, when everything's assembled and you see some nuisance you'd rather wasn't there. Right, the 3 screws are in place. You can tighten them up. Only managed to stab myself in the thumb with the tail end of that spring once. That's pretty good. Okay, so just check the action of that. That's nice and free running. The arm and its retaining screw need to be cleaned. The undersurface is important to have clean, in particular because if that's greasy, it'll tend to stick to the plate underneath it instead of swinging freely. And I'll just run around that screw head. Likewise, if there's a blob of sticky grease on that, the arm won't swing freely. Right, that looks good. I usually take a bit of molybdenum paste, wipe it once in the screw hole where it's got a pivot, and once in the slot where the slot picks up the arm, the stud on the blade actuating ring, and I can fit this in place. Hook its spring back in place, check the action. Nice and snappy, that's good. Retard gear train's running smoothly too. Alright, bit of graphite powder on there would be the secret, I think.